In the somber hills of Lebanon, amidst the ancient stones that have witnessed countless conflicts, one of the most audacious operations in the history of modern espionage unfolded. The tension in the Middle East during the 70s created a scenario where every strategic move could trigger an all-out war or save precious lives. In 1972, 3 Israeli pilots found themselves imprisoned in Syrian dungeons, victims of an air war that knew neither borders nor mercy. Gideon Magan, Pini Nachmani and Boaz Eitan represented more than just captured soldiers. They were symbols of a dilemma plaguing Tel Aviv: how to rescue their men when diplomacy had failed and brute force would mean catastrophe. The answer would come through a meticulously planned operation, where Israeli intelligence would prove that tactical creativity could overcome the enemy's numerical superiority. The desert winds carried the echo of the combat that intensified after the Six-Day War. The Golan Heights remained an open wound on the regional political geography, where every Israeli air patrol was met by a growing wall of Soviet missiles. Syrian anti-aircraft defense systems, fueled by Moscow's military generosity, transformed the airspace into a zone of calculated death. It was in this lethal context that 3 Israeli aircraft were shot down by the dreaded SA-2 missiles, forcing their pilots to bail out over enemy territory. The capture was quick and efficient. Even before the parachutes touched Syrian soil, local patrols were already converging on the drop zones. The 3 airmen were immediately transferred to Damascus, where they became valuable pieces on the regional geopolitical board. The imprisonment of the pilots represented more than a military victory for Damascus. It constituted a devastating psychological blow against Israel. In Israeli military culture, airmen occupy an almost sacred position, representing the pinnacle of the national fighting elite. Their capture not only shook the morale of the armed forces, but also created unbearable political pressure on the government. The prisoners' families organized relentless public campaigns, while public opinion demanded immediate action. Damascus masterfully exploited this vulnerability, turning the prisoners into instruments of propaganda and diplomatic bargaining. Interrogations were conducted with calculated brutality, not only to extract military information, but also to psychologically break the captives. Each day in captivity increased the pressure on Tel Aviv, which saw its diplomatic options systematically evaporate. Initial attempts at negotiation proved fruitless in the face of Syrian intransigence. Damascus refused any direct exchange, preferring to keep the pilots as a guarantee of moral and strategic superiority. Traditional diplomatic channels were exhaustively tested: international mediators, multilateral organizations, pressure from Western allies. Nothing could breach the Syrian position. To every Israeli proposal, Damascus responded with even more exorbitant demands, demonstrating that it had no genuine interest in resolving the crisis through diplomacy. This reality forced Israeli strategists to consider more dramatic alternatives. Direct military operation against Syrian territory was quickly dismissed due to the risks of regional escalation. An invasion to free the prisoners could trigger a generalized war involving other Arab powers and potentially the Soviet Union. The solution emerged from the brightest minds in Israeli intelligence. If Damascus refused to negotiate, Israel would create its own bargaining chips. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity: to capture high-value Syrian officials in territory where they felt secure. Lebanon, with its fragmented sovereignty and limited territorial control, offered the ideal scenario for an operation of this magnitude. Syrian forces routinely operated on Lebanese soil, coordinating activities with allied militias and overseeing strategic positions. This regular presence created identifiable patterns, vulnerabilities that could be exploited by a specialized force. The mission would require surgical precision, capturing live targets without provoking a large-scale confrontation, extracting valuable information, and creating sufficient pressure to force Damascus to the negotiating table. The choice naturally fell on the Sayeret Matkal, an elite unit born from the specific needs of Israeli warfare. Composed of exceptional soldiers, many of whom would become national leaders, the unit combined special combat capabilities with intelligence sophistication. Ehud Barak, a future prime minister, was one of the prominent figures of this force that operated at the intersection of military action and strategic espionage. The months preceding the operation were dedicated to the meticulous collection of information on Syrian movements in Lebanon. Every convoy displacement, every communication pattern, every individual habit of the target officers was catalogued and analyzed. Infiltrated agents, local informants, and surveillance technology created a detailed mosaic of enemy movements. The choice of the ambush location required precise topographic studies, a narrow curve on a mountain road where convoys would be forced to slow down, offering a window of opportunity for action. Timing was also crucial. Hours of low visibility, when surprise would be maximal and possibilities of escape minimal. The preparation for Operation Crate required months of meticulous planning, where every detail could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Intelligence analysts worked tirelessly to map the movement patterns of Syrian officials, identifying their preferred routes through Lebanese territory. The mountainous roads connecting Syrian positions offered limited displacement alternatives, creating natural choke points that could be tactically exploited. The choice of the ambush zone was based on rigorous criteria: sufficient isolation to avoid witnesses, favorable topography for ground control, and proximity to escape routes for the Israeli forces. Preliminary reconnaissance revealed that Syrian convoys followed relatively predictable schedules, taking advantage of twilight to move with less risk of Israeli aerial detection. Rehearsals were conducted under conditions that perfectly simulated the real operational environment. Exact replicas of Syrian vehicles were built, allowing the commandos to train assault procedures without leaving traces of their intentions. Every movement was timed, every action practiced until it became instinctive. Sayeret Matkal soldiers mastered specific techniques for quick neutralization of targets without causing fatal injuries. The mission required live prisoners, not martyrs who could further inflame the regional situation. Coordination between different elements of the force was rehearsed exhaustively. Assault groups, containment teams, communications specialists, and extraction units worked as a single organism. Weapons were carefully selected to minimize risks of accidental deaths, prioritizing non-lethal ammunition when possible. The logistical aspect of the operation presented unique challenges. Israeli forces needed to penetrate Lebanese territory, establish an ambush position, execute the capture and extract both the prisoners and the team itself without leaving compromising evidence. The vehicles used were specifically modified for the mission, equipped with encrypted communication systems and transport capacity for multiple prisoners. Infiltration and extraction routes were planned, with multiple alternatives, considering scenarios where the original plan might fail. Support teams were strategically positioned along these routes, ready to provide assistance or divert enemy attention if necessary. Temporal coordination was absolutely critical. Any delay could expose the force to Syrian countermeasures or diplomatic complications with Lebanese authorities. Intelligence continued to refine information until the last moment before execution. Field agents confirmed the composition of the target convoys, identifying not only the highest value officers, but also their escorts and security measures. Intercepts of Syrian communications revealed details about specific schedules and planned destinations. This information allowed Israeli commanders to precisely calculate the optimal moments for action. Analysis of the target's personalities also influenced the preparation. Knowing the backgrounds, temperaments, and possible reactions of the Syrian officers was essential to controlling the situation after the capture. Some might resist violently, others might try to negotiate, and each scenario required a different approach. The political issue remained equally complex. Israel needed to balance the operational necessity with the inevitable diplomatic consequences. The violation of Lebanese sovereignty would be internationally denounced, but Tel Aviv calculated that success in rescuing its pilots would justify the political costs. Preparations were made to manage the media and diplomatic reaction following the operation. Carefully drafted statements were prepared, defending the action as a proportional response to Syrian intransigence. Communication channels with international powers were discreetly alerted, preparing the ground for explanations that would minimize formal condemnations. The hope was that a quick and clean success would create accomplished facts that would be difficult to reverse diplomatically. On the night chosen for the execution, Atmospheric conditions perfectly collaborated with the Israeli planners. The absence of moonlight provided ideal cover for the movement of the special forces, while the mild temperature ensured comfortable operation for sensitive equipment. Sayeret Matkal commandos moved through the Lebanese border like shadows, using infiltration routes mapped out during months of reconnaissance. Each man carried specific equipment for his function: silent communication devices, non-lethal weaponry, containment equipment for prisoners, and medical supplies for emergencies. Operational discipline was absolute. No unnecessary noise, no movement that could compromise the force's position. The establishment of the ambush zone followed a strict schedule. Positions were occupied in a calculated sequence, creating a ring of control around the chosen interception point. Snipers positioned themselves on elevations overlooking the road, ready to neutralize any armed resistance. Assault teams hid near the road, equipped with portable obstacles to stop moving vehicles. Communications specialists established contact with support bases, ensuring constant coordination with commanders in Israeli territory. The tension was palpable but controlled. Years of training had prepared these soldiers for moments of extreme pressure. Every man knew his role perfectly and the consequences of failure, not only for the mission but for the 3 pilots awaiting salvation in Syrian prisons. Waiting for the target convoys tested the nerves of even the most experienced veterans. Sounds from the forest were amplified by adrenaline, every movement of nocturnal animals interpreted as a possible threat. The commandos held positions for hours, communicating only through pre-established signals. Night vision equipment constantly monitored approaches, while listening devices detected vibrations of vehicles still distant. Silence discipline was fundamental. Premature discovery would completely ruin the operation and could result in a devastating confrontation. During these hours of tension, each soldier mentally reviewed his procedures, visualizing possible scenarios and appropriate responses. When the headlights of the first convoy finally appeared on the distant curve, the Israeli military machine activated with mechanical precision. Silent signals ran through the positions, alerting all teams to the target's proximity. The Syrian convoy approached confidently, its occupants unaware of the trap awaiting them. 3 military vehicles were transporting officers of different ranks, exactly as predicted by intelligence. The speed was moderate, appropriate for nighttime mountain roads. Inside the vehicles, casual conversations about military and personal matters created an atmosphere of routine, without suspicion of imminent danger. Syrian drivers navigated familiar curves, routes traversed dozens of times without incident. At the exact moment calculated by the planners, obstacles appeared on the road like apparitions. Tree trunks and stones completely blocked the road, forcing the convoy to an abrupt stop. Before the Syrians could react, masked figures emerged from all directions, shouting orders in perfect Arabic. The surprise was total. Experienced Syrian soldiers suddenly found themselves surrounded by a superior force in number and preparation. Weapons were ripped from incredulous hands, documents confiscated, and target officers quickly identified through intelligence photographs. Resistance was minimal. The speed and coordination of the attack left little time for organized reaction. In a matter of minutes, 5 Syrian officers were detained, while their escorts were neutralized without excessive violence. The extraction phase began immediately after the captures. Prisoners were blindfolded and transported in vehicles specifically prepared to accommodate them safely. Syrian equipment and documents were systematically collected, creating a valuable repository of military intelligence. The cleanup of the operation zone was meticulous. Evidence of the Israeli presence was eliminated or masked. Syrian vehicles were abandoned in positions that suggested an ambush by local forces, not a sophisticated foreign operation. The extraction movement followed planned alternative routes, avoiding known checkpoints and regular patrol areas. Throughout the return journey, encrypted communications kept commanders informed about progress and any complications. The return of the Israeli Special Forces to national territory marked only the beginning of an equally complex phase of the operation. The 5 captured Syrian officers, whose names included commanders of different hierarchical ranks, were immediately transferred to specialized interrogation facilities. Israeli intelligence recognized that the value of these prisoners extended far beyond their potential as bargaining chips. They represented an invaluable source of information about Syrian military capabilities, operational plans, and command structures. Interrogations were conducted by specialists fluent in Arabic and specific regional dialects, men trained in advanced psychological techniques to extract information without resorting to physical violence. Each officer was treated according to their rank and importance, with personalized approaches based on preliminary psychological analyses conducted during years of intelligence observation. The analysis of the documents and materials confiscated during the ambush proved even more valuable than the captures themselves. Detailed maps showed the positioning of Syrian units along the border, while personal notebooks contained observations about troop morale, logistical deficiencies, and confidential evaluations of commanders. Communication codes were deciphered, revealing frequencies used for coordination between different units. Personal photographs helped to identify other officers not previously known to Israeli intelligence. Intercepted correspondence provided insights into family relationships and emotional vulnerabilities that could be explored in future operations. Every fragment of paper was catalogued, translated, and analyzed by military intelligence specialists, creating a comprehensive database on the Syrian adversary. Simultaneously, the international diplomatic reaction began to materialize as foreseen by the Israeli planners. The Lebanese government, already fragile due to internal tensions and the foreign military presence on its territory, protested vehemently against the violation of its sovereignty. Beirut filed a formal complaint with the United Nations Security Council, denouncing the Israeli aggression and demanding international condemnation. Damascus reacted with calculated fury, denouncing what it classified as a terrorist kidnapping and demanding the immediate return of the captured officers. Syrian propaganda intensely exploited the incident, portraying the officers as innocent victims of Israeli brutality. Moscow, Damascus's main military supplier, issued statements of support for its Arab allies, but avoided committing to concrete actions that could escalate the conflict. Israel responded through carefully orchestrated diplomatic channels, presenting its version of events as a legitimate response to Syrian intransigence. Official spokesmen emphasized that the operation aimed exclusively to create conditions for the release of Israeli pilots unjustly held captive. The Israeli legal argument was based on the principle of reciprocity. If Damascus refused to negotiate through traditional diplomacy, Israel would exercise the right to create its own bargaining guarantees. Official communiques emphasized the humanitarian treatment given to the Syrian prisoners, contrasting with reports of torture suffered by the Israeli pilots. This communication strategy sought to gain international sympathy and neutralize criticism about the methods used in the operation. Indirect negotiations for the exchange of prisoners began almost immediately after the captures, but unfolded through tortuous and lengthy paths. International mediators, including representatives of the International Red Cross and diplomats from neutral countries, established communication channels between the warring parties. Damascus initially refused any recognition of the legitimacy of the captures, insisting that it was an international crime that should be punished, not negotiated. Tel Aviv maintained a firm position, arguing that it had created a symmetrical situation. Both sides held prisoners from the adversary, creating a basis for a mutually advantageous exchange. Months of frustrating negotiations followed, with proposals and counter-proposals circulating through intermediaries. The complexity of the negotiations increased due to the multiple actors involved and divergent interests. The Lebanese government demanded reparations for the violation of its sovereignty and the return of Lebanese citizens captured during the operation. Palestinian organizations took advantage of the crisis to pressure for the release of their own members held in Israeli prisons. Moderate Arab countries tried to mediate but faced pressures from hardliners who rejected any concession to Israel. Israeli public opinion remained divided between support for the audacious operation and concerns about dangerous precedents being set. The families of the captured pilots exerted constant pressure on the government to speed up the release process, while human rights groups questioned the methods used on both sides of the conflict. The months subsequent to Operation Crate turned into an intricate diplomatic dance where every move was carefully calculated by multiple regional and international actors. Damascus found itself in a delicate position. Recognizing the legitimacy of the Israeli captures would mean accepting a dangerous precedent, but maintaining absolute intransigence would prolong the suffering of the detained Syrian officers. Internal pressure grew as the prisoners' families organized public campaigns demanding governmental action. Syrian newspapers, rigidly controlled by the state, published emotional articles about heroes kidnapped by the Zionist enemy, creating an atmosphere that made any diplomatic concession difficult. Sunni and Christian religious leaders in the country united in public prayers for the officers' release, increasing the moral dimension of the conflict. Hafez al-Assad faced a classic dilemma of authoritarian leadership, demonstrating strength and inflexibility, or the pragmatism necessary to resolve a humanitarian crisis. Israel, in turn, used the prolonged negotiation period to maximize the intelligence value extracted from the captured prisoners and documents. Experienced interrogators applied sophisticated psychological techniques, alternating between psychological pressure and respectful treatment to extract valuable information. Syrian officers revealed details about command structures, Soviet equipment capabilities, and future planning for the border with Israel. Confiscated maps were compared with existing intelligence, revealing significant discrepancies in the Israeli assessment of enemy positions. Deciphered communication codes allowed the interception of Syrian messages for subsequent months, providing valuable insights into troop morale and the effectiveness of different military units. Personal photographs helped identify the network of relationships between officers, creating a detailed organizational chart of the Syrian military hierarchy. The international community observed the developments with growing interest, recognizing that the resolution of the crisis would set important precedents for future conflicts in the region. The United States maintained a carefully neutral position, avoiding alienating its Israeli ally while preserving relationships with moderate Arab countries. American diplomacy worked discreetly behind the scenes, encouraging moderation from both parties and offering communication channels when necessary. The Soviet Union faced pressure from Arab allies for more decisive actions, but Moscow preferred to avoid direct confrontation that could escalate into a global crisis. European countries took advantage of the situation to demonstrate diplomatic independence, offering themselves as neutral mediators between regional adversaries. France, with historical interests in Lebanon, particularly pressed for a resolution that would preserve Lebanese sovereignty. During this period, 3 previous attempts at similar operations were revealed through intelligence leaks, demonstrating that Crete represented only the success in a series of efforts to resolve the pilot's crisis. The previous operations failed due to various factors: last-minute cancellations due to political concerns, inaccurate intelligence about enemy movements, and the unexpected presence of armored vehicles in Syrian convoys. Analysis of these previous failures provided valuable lessons that contributed to the final success of the third attempt. Israeli commanders meticulously studied each failure, refining operational procedures and decision criteria. This persistence demonstrated the absolute commitment of the Israeli state to the principle of not abandoning captured soldiers, regardless of the financial costs or political risks involved. Israeli public opinion remained largely favorable to the operation, but concerns about long-term consequences grew. Military analysts questioned whether the precedent set by Crete would encourage hostile countries to use similar tactics against Israeli targets. International relations scholars debated the legality of special operations in the territory of third countries, even when justified by humanitarian needs. The Israeli media, subject to military censorship on security matters, published limited discussions on the ethical aspects of the operation. Veterans of previous conflicts were divided between admiration for the tactical audacity and concerns about the escalation of regional violence. The families of the captured pilots organized demonstrations in support of the operation, but also pressed for speeding up the exchange negotiations. The humanitarian aspect of the crisis attracted growing attention from international human rights organizations. The International Red Cross requested access to the prisoners from both sides, offering to verify detention conditions and facilitate communication with families. Reports on the treatment of Israeli pilots in Syrian prisons included accusations of torture and prolonged isolation, contrasting with the relatively respectful treatment given to the Syrian officers in Israeli custody. This disparity became a valuable diplomatic tool for Israel, demonstrating the moral superiority of its military practices. Human rights organizations pressed both sides to comply with the Geneva Conventions on the treatment of prisoners of war. Although the exact legal status of the detainees remained disputed, pacifist activists used the crisis to renew calls for diplomatic solutions to the broader Arab-Israeli conflict. After almost a year of complex negotiations and increasing diplomatic pressures, a decisive breakthrough occurred through discreet mediation conducted by a neutral country that maintained cordial relationships with both parties. The final exchange formula emerged from the mutual recognition that prolonging the crisis served the interests of neither side involved. Damascus faced growing internal pressure from the families of the captured officers, while Tel Aviv dealt with international anxiety about the precedents set by the operation. On June 3, 1973, a complex agreement was finally implemented in a discreet ceremony supervised by international observers. The three Israeli pilots, Gideon Magan, Pini Nachmani, and Boaz Eitan, were released from Syrian prisons and returned to Israeli territory in a coordinated operation that involved multiple exchange points and international verification. In exchange, Israel released not only the 5 Syrian officers captured during Operation Crate, but also 41 other Syrian prisoners held in custody since previous conflicts. This expansion of the agreement reflected the political necessity of both sides to demonstrate significant victories to their respective public opinions. Syria could proclaim the liberation of dozens of its citizens, while Israel emphasized the return of its elite pilots. Lebanese citizens captured during the operation were also included in the exchange, meeting Beirut's pressures for a comprehensive resolution of the crisis. Additionally, a Druze citizen from Maid al-Shams, previously convicted by Israeli military courts for espionage for Syria, was included in the agreement as a political gesture to conclude pending issues between the parties. The exchange ceremony was meticulously choreographed to minimize the risks of incidents that could compromise the fragile agreement. A neutral location on the border was selected, with the presence of international observers to ensure compliance with the agreed terms. Medical representatives examined all prisoners before the exchange, documenting their health conditions to prevent subsequent accusations of mistreatment. The media was kept at a controlled distance, allowing limited coverage that would satisfy the propaganda needs of both sides without creating opportunities for provocations. The prisoners' families were authorized to participate emotionally in the event, creating humanitarian images that justified the political sacrifices necessary to reach an agreement. Logistics coordination involved multiple security agencies working in unprecedented cooperation for this conflict-ridden region. For Israel, the return of the 3 pilots represented a validation of the fundamental principle of not abandoning captured soldiers, regardless of the costs involved. The reception ceremony in Israeli territory became a national event, with extensive media coverage and the participation of political and military leaders. Testimonies from the freed pilots provided disturbing details about their prison conditions, including prolonged interrogation sessions and psychological isolation. These revelations reinforced the Israeli narrative about the need for audacious actions to protect soldiers against hostile regimes. Medical and psychological analysis of the pilots revealed the lasting impacts of their captivity, including emotional trauma that would require prolonged treatment. Their experiences became valuable tools for the resistance training of future generations of military pilots. Operation Crate established important precedents for future Israeli special actions, demonstrating the viability of capture operations in enemy territory when conducted with adequate preparation and clear political objectives. Lessons learned from the operation influenced the development of military doctrines for subsequent decades, emphasizing the importance of precise intelligence, multi-agency coordination, and comprehensive political planning. The successes and failures of previous attempts were systematically analyzed, creating an institutional knowledge base that would inform similar future operations. The capabilities demonstrated by Sayeret Matkal elevated the unit's reputation as one of the most effective special forces in the world, attracting interest and collaboration from allied military organizations. The diplomatic consequences of the operation resonated far beyond the immediate prisoner exchange. The demonstration of Israeli capability for deep operations in enemy territory served as a powerful deterrent against future hostile actions. Arab countries were forced to re-evaluate the vulnerabilities of their own officers and military installations, implementing additional security measures that complicated routine operations. Relationships between Israel and Lebanon were permanently affected, with Beirut developing a lasting distrust of Israeli intentions. Syria intensified military cooperation with the Soviet Union, seeking advanced defense technologies that could prevent future Israeli penetrations. These developments contributed to the regional arms race that would characterize subsequent decades of the conflict in the Middle East, demonstrating how limited tactical operations can generate lasting strategic consequences in geopolitically volatile environments.